There we go. Cool. So I kind of wanted to, first of all, just introduce myself. I am Monges Makalima, and I am currently the chairperson of the Africa Board for Coaching, Consulting and Coaching Psychology. And the real work that of the Africa Board for Coaching, Consulting and Coaching Psychology is really around um, increasing the credibility of coaching, consulting, and coaching psychology. So those three professions, we see them as intertwined, especially on the African continent, where the work is not only about sharing knowledge and advice, which is the work of consultants, but also being able to embed behaviors and make sure that as a consultant, I've been a consultant for what feels like 1,000 years now. Although I know there are people in the room who have had a lot and even longer experience than me. So I'm not even sure how you guys feel. I feel like I've been doing it forever. And but what I realize is that when you do consulting um, and you leave, things start falling apart. So coaching becomes a very useful mechanism to bring, but it is important to have credible coaches who exercise, who practice CPD, who essentially connect as we connecting today. But lastly, the third domain that I find ourselves having to work with is the coaching psychology domain, where if we take coaching on this continent, there are needs of people to not only perform. There's also a lot of trauma and a lot of challenges, a lot of issues that many people have come through. So combining coaching and psychology to essentially create an even deeper um, frame of helping leaders becomes useful in this instance. And the work of the ABCCCP is really around protecting the profession across the continent. But what I wanted to do is not necessarily to go through this whole presentation, but just some of the things that we're doing. We've published the Journal for Coaching, Consulting, and Coaching Psychology, which is in many ways available. Right now, it's still available on Amazon, but we're really working on building it up so that it's actually available in a number of the academic spaces as well. I'm glad to say that it is read quite a bit, which is for me pleasing. And then, of course, this session and a number of sessions that we are doing are continuous professional development sessions where we help professionals across the continent and across the world, because our tagline is from Africa to the world, right? Because the idea has been that what's the knowledge in Africa? In fact, Badri and I, that's kind of how we met, because we are busy working on a publication around knowledge frameworks and leadership frameworks from an African continent, and coaching. It's been a very interesting experience that we've been having there. But the whole idea is about making sure that um, professionals, coaches, consultants, and coaching psychologists undergo continuous professional development. We are excited also about rewarding and awarding these professions. So we are in our fourth um, Africa Coaching and Consulting Awards. I think this year we will be doing, I think, number 4, which I think for me is quite interesting. And we look at people across the continent and some people across the world so far. These are some of the winners from the third one that we did. So when you get a call and you say, what are these? The real work around the ABCCCP is really around who are the great consultants, who are the great coaches who actually can add value to your organization as well as community or even family in this instance. And of course, one of the other things we run is the Coaching for Africa Symposium. One of the things that differentiates ABCCCP from many of the other pieces of work that gets done in professional bodies across the world is that we're not just about the knowledge, we're about how is the knowledge and the work we're doing helping Africa become a different place 100 years from now. And the Coaching for Africa Symposium is our knowledge space. In fact, excitingly today, we just decided on a theme of the 9th Coaching in Africa Symposium, which we will be having in May next year. So you'll get the information around it. And at the core of it is about beneficiation of the continent and what is the work of consultants, what's the work of coaches, and what's the work of coaching psychologists, leaders, everybody in this. So that is essentially, oh, and then we've just published something nice that I think I'm actually very excited about, coaching methods from across the continent by some of Africa's leading coaches. It is available in and on Amazon, both in Kindle as well as hard copy. So please get yourself a copy. I see Dr. Delani is in the room. He was one of the people that actually contributed to it. Dr. Dumi, of course, who is also in the room. And then what also is available, it is also available if you're in South Africa or on the SADC from takealot.com, which probably makes it so much easier. And of course, join the ABCCCP. It's very easy. Just go to abccp.com and become an affiliate member, and then you can up your professional status from there, from master, from established master as well as chartered status for all of the three categories. That's essentially the quick introduction there around who is your host, and then of course me, as long as my work really is around making sure that the stuff works. And this, we have this at least twice a year, this global leadership dialogue. And the real work here is pretty much about having a group of us as leaders here. I don't need a room of 200 people. I just need to get a room of people that are having conversations about what is happening with leadership across the world. And as coaches, as consultants, as leaders, what does that then mean for us? And that's the question today. However, the question today, I'm refocusing a little bit because every time it happens, it is focused by something that I'm observing. One of the small things that I do is I'm an editor for news for a small radio station here with just about 200,000 odd people across the world. And so as an editor, I get to see a lot of what's happening across the world as far as news and leadership is concerned. And what has been interesting for 2024, so I'm going to share yet another slide, and I promise this is the last one. And it's just now to create context of the conversation we are having today. So what I'm also noticing is that there has been a lot of shifts and changes across the world. As we speak, about 70 countries in the world are going through uh, or will be going through elections this year. That's 44% of the world that is going through that process, right? And with that happening, the question that seems to stick at the back of my mind as all of these elections are happening is, and I think what triggered the conversation was pretty much the elections in the US as they were happening. Because if you remember, right at the beginning of their election season, there were two elder gentlemen that were running against each other. It is fascinating how the situation has changed a few months since we started having this conversation, because we were looking at how what's his name, Joe Biden, as well as uh, Donald Trump, were the options of this country in the world that's supposed to be the best and represent the world superpower. It just confounded me, and that's kind of what triggered this to say, what gives us as what gives a leader the license to lead? That's one. But as leaders ourselves, what gives us the license to lead? But as leaders who work with leaders, how do we have conversations around this license to lead? So these are the layers of the conversations. I like this quote by Octavia Butler that says, choose your leaders with wisdom, because if you're led by a coward, you will be controlled by all that he fears. Um, but I won't go through all of that. Now, my apologies. I seem to have a bit of a frog in my throat. So as I mentioned, 70 countries across the world are going through this graphic. Is a graphic that I found useful from CNN. 70 countries across the world are going through elections. In Africa, there's about 19. And on the Online Radio, we recently had a conversation, I think on Monday, reflecting on many of the countries across the continent. This is about 45% of the world that's going through this conversation. India just recently had their own, it lasted what, about 14 days in terms of the elections. Badri, I'm going to ask you to talk to it after I call you in. So we have Badri here. Badri and I had talked a little bit just before this conversation. So I'm curious to hear how that went. But there were very interesting developments there in terms of this election as opposed to the election before. This is essentially the largest population that has actually gone through the elections this year. Mexico has gone through um, its own quite recently, and of course, as you know, the US is about to have its own in November, and then there has been interesting developments in Russia. I'm gonna do it in the next slide, and you'll see. But in Africa, we've also seen very interesting shifts. South Africa, my country, just finished their elections now in May, June, and leading to the government of national unity, the second in the last 30 years of independence, or yeah, post-apartheid in this instance. And we've seen Rwanda having gone through their own, and it has been a very interesting conversation we've been having about the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, and why does he keep winning? And the paradox also of how some people would then be accusing him of twisting the arm of a number of people so that he can continue winning. But at the same time, he is doing really great work, at least according to the people of Rwanda, but also in terms of what we are seeing develop across the country. So, does that give him the right to lead? Does that give him the right to continue the conversation, to continue to be a leader going forward? That's the question, the conversation I'm hoping we can have soon as I shut up. And then, and then of course, what happened in Senegal, I think Dr. Dumi, you will correct me here, was we had a young man appointed a little earlier on in the year, and we were very excited about having a young leader on the continent where many old people, many elders are continuously fighting to continue to be nominated and led. I mean, we've seen Nigeria happen there, and then but the question becomes, what does that mean for a continent that essentially has the youngest population in the world? And then lastly, and this image is, by the way, a courtesy of CNN. So I don't have the wisdom or the cleverness to create it. Lastly, as a positioning the whole idea of the D word. Now, democracy has been used continuously across the world as a way of either judging, uh, assessing, evaluating, and even um, waging war. So, what I forgot, by the way, there's a lot of war in the context of what's happening across the world. Ukraine and Russia are still going on. So each time they show up in these conversations, we're looking as if there's going to be a full-blown war that will be happening now with Israel and the Hezbollah on the other side. What's happening there? What's going on? And then Africa, I hear, I'm still not sure, two countries that have been offered a space, a seat in the UN Security Council. I know that many Africans in the AU particularly has been chasing this. However, there is a catch. It is coming without a veto power. Still only 5 countries that have veto power on the UN Security Council. What does that mean? And then as I was then going to this D word, democracy is being used continuously. Who defines what democracy looks like? So if we look at Iran, Russia, Belarus, they are regarded as a lot more authoritarian regimes. While Pakistan, Mexico's just elected a female president, I think, for the first time, if I'm not mistaken, are much more hybrid. What was fascinating for me looking at this graphic was how uh, Indonesia, but particularly the US, is sitting in a flawed democracy space, yet they are the biggest um, proponents, at least in terms of their PR, is democracy. And again, it's not to put down the US, it's just as a reflection of what's happening. And then we saw Rishi Sunak recently just gave up the seat, all in tears, for Kai Steimer, who then became the new prime minister for the UK. So this is essentially the background of this conversation. And I swear this is the last PowerPoint I am sharing. I just wanted to give a context around where does this conversation come from, what triggered it, and then you feel free to add whatever else that you need to add into it, if as you could.